This has been a big question, a big topic. How do I teach beginners, or how do I get people interested in taking my yoga classes if they've never done it before? And then once you get to it, once you actually have people coming in, how do you teach them? There's a lot of different bodies, there's a lot of different goals, a lot of different people, and this is your guide to exactly that. My name is Ashley. I am the creator of the Confident Yogi, a beginner course, and it's my goal to empower and help yoga teachers to teach with confidence, both online and in person, in classes, in private lessons, in studios, wherever you are. So what do you do when you're going to teach a class and it's your very first lesson? How do you show up and make sure that others show up again after that first class? You don't scare them away or they don't become intimidated. The first class that you do, the first lesson, is less about what you're teaching. The very first lesson is meant to make your students comfortable. Comfortable in this environment, comfortable on Zoom, comfortable in their space. You will add a few teaching points there, but for the most part, it is to get to know your students, have them get to know you, and make them comfortable, set their minds and bodies at ease. And so what does that look like? So if you are in a studio space and you are in person, what you're going to do is make sure that each person walking in the door feels welcome. Smile on your face, good customer service, something we're not really taught in yoga teacher training, but customer service goes a long way. Make people feel comfortable. Tell them exactly where they should put their shoes. There's a lot of things that we know as teachers that we forget is simple, like you think of them maybe as dumb questions, but there are no dumb questions. We think they're simple concepts that everyone should know and are just obvious, and they're not. So the fact that we have bare feet, or can I wear my socks? Or where do I put my shoes? Or do I need equipment? Do I need props? What is this? What's a yoga mat? Do I need a yoga mat? Do you have one for me? So how you make people feel most comfortable when they walk in is to ask them yes questions, making sure that they answer yes to whatever your question is. So if you see them walk in without a yoga mat, you ask them, would you like to borrow a yoga mat? Well, yes. Is this your first time at a yoga class? Yes. And if occasionally the answer is no, that's all right. But try to ask questions where you assume the answer is going to be yes. That example of, would you like to borrow a yoga mat? And they say yes, is a better question than, do you own a yoga mat? When you see them not carrying one, then they're going to say, well, no. And then they have to proceed and ask the question about if they need to borrow one, or if they should have one, because those yeses are going to be a little bit more uplifting, more so than no answers, which are a little bit more draining. Would you like me to show you around the studio? Or here, come with me, I'm going to show you around the studio. So give people a tour, even if your space is small, even if it's just a room with a couple props and a bathroom on the side. Show them exactly where you can go and let them know at any time you can get up and use the restroom, or restroom facilities are available before and after class only, or whatever the rules are. So give them a little tour. And so once you've shown everyone around, you've had them sign the waiver, you walk them through the entire process of coming into the studio. After you come in, I love putting people in a circle. I love putting people in a circle so that no one feels like they're in the back, or they would rather be in the front, or they can't see. So a circle is a great way to get people to feel connected. And then it's on to introductions. And you can introduce yourself as the teacher first. Tell them about your first class experience. Allow them to connect with you from a way that you relate with them. You remember your first class experience. It was scary. Tell them the feelings you're probably feeling. It was scary, I was overwhelmed. So tell them a little story of how you got started, mostly with your yoga practice, so that they can relate. You can tell them a little bit more of the styles you teach, but don't get too caught up with words that are like, what? Like Sanskrit. So even if you teach yin, vinyasa, ashtanga, like all these other styles, they're not quite there yet. And that's going to feel like, hey, I don't get it. I don't understand, and you're talking in this funky language. We can get to a little bit of Sanskrit later when it's intentional, but for this practice, you're going to speak in terms that people just starting will understand. Ask each person to step up and say their name, what brought them in, and their goals. The reason I like to hear people's goals for the practice is that a beginner yoga class or series is not meant for people to stay in long term. It's, the beginning. And so if someone says their goal is to build strength and flexibility, I know then what I can refer them to in the future, what teacher, what class, or what kind of practice. If someone says their goal is just to unwind and relax after a really hectic and chaotic day, I know then that I could recommend they take more restorative or yin type practices later on. So I love to hear each person's goals. And maybe I'm taking notes, maybe I'm not, but you can do the same thing when you are on Zoom in an online class. You can ask each person to talk about their goals, or even just write in the chat box if people don't want their video on, your name and what brought you in, what brings you in, and goals. I like those three. You can also do an icebreaker question, like something funny, like what's your favorite food, or what did you have for breakfast, or something sort of silly. So you can either do one question at a time around the group, or you can have one person talk on all the 2 or 3 questions and then move on to the next. Not only are you introducing them to yoga, but you're introducing them to a community of like-minded people. And although people don't say they come to yoga necessarily to start with for the other people, that is a big deciding factor of whether or not people are going to stay. It's if the people around them are likable, right? Are likable, and we're likable and approachable by speaking up, by telling people about ourselves, and also asking questions. So learning about others. And then you can find that when people talk about themselves, others are relating. So they're like, oh yeah, like she said, or like he said, it's, I feel the same. And so you feel a little bit more at ease after this introduction. Now, after introductions, this is going to take a while. So let's say your class is an hour long. You're at least 15 minutes in, if not a little bit longer, just by sitting and doing introductions and showing people around the studio. So that takes a little time. Beyond that, you then get into the elements of yoga. What you might then go into in a beginner class is talking about different props, why you would use them, what they are called, and talk about blankets, talk about your strap, bolster, whatever props that you're going to use. Now, if you're not going to use props, then talk about them anyway, just a little introduction to them. So talking about props at home and props for the studio, getting people to know that these are not intimidation factors. I used to think that when I walked into a class and there was a bunch of props set up around the yoga mat, that it was going to be a hard class, or it triggered something in my brain thinking, this is unknown territory to me. I am so used to practicing at home with no props. So coming to a studio and seeing all these props is a little scary. When the reality is that props make your class more accessible and more personable, so you're able to adjust. So make that known to your students right away. And then you get into the practice. What are you going to teach first with beginner yoga? You can teach, what is yoga? We can have that discussion. A lot of people will come to beginner yoga class expecting just to do a bunch of poses. But this first class, you might do a few poses, but it's not just here's a bunch of poses in alignment. That is one element. And explain that, like, hey, we're going to get into some poses, but just know that is not the full practice. And I'm not going to go into the full scope of the 8 limbs of yoga because, again, overwhelm too much. So instead, I'm going to run you through the first couple limbs of yoga in the very basics. The first thing, breath. We could talk a long time on breath. And this is where you could then use the Sanskrit term and say breath is also known as pranayama. You don't need to remember that, but that is the Sanskrit term. Pranayama, breath, life force, your chi, you call it what you want. And putting into simple basic terms, how do you breathe? Spend some time just checking in with that breath, like noticing how you breathe currently without changing anything. And then start to teach how to breathe actually into your belly into your rib cage, into your chest, like the big deep breath. What's a full breath actually mean? Maybe we try this seated, maybe you try it lying down, maybe you try it with hands on your belly, in and out through your nose. So talk on that breath first. And I have a simple 3-part breath script that I do for every single class. And this script is really just a template or bullet points of 3 different elements that I mentioned. The breath, how do you breathe? How do you actually breathe? In and out through the nose, in this circular motion, filling the belly from bottom to top. That's how you breathe. Why you breathe that way? Why do we breathe in and out through the nose, down to the lower belly? Well, it helps keep you present, for one. It helps keep you present. It also helps to relax some of the tension that you feel. So why do we breathe that way? And then what do we use the breath for during our class? So during our practice, we use the breath as a guide or a check-in, a place where we can come back to the present moment, and also just to notice if we need to back off or intensify. So how do we use that breath? We use it to modify, intensify. Okay, so how do you breathe? Why do we breathe that way? And how do you use the breath? So that's my 3-part breath script. So if you did anything each day, something different each day moving forward, it would be to deepen that breath, taking those full belly breaths. This is not the class that I'm going to talk on Ujjayi Pranayama or Nadi Shodhan or whatever the other kinds of pranayama styles are. I'm just going to talk about belly breathing, like the base of how we breathe. And then we get into spinal warm-ups. So how to connect that breath with some movement. And we can do this seated, or you can do it on your hands and knees, on your back. However, I like seated because then everyone's upright. They can see you, they can see each other. So spinal movements, talking about warming up the spine and this core area that actually helps to move the rest of your body. So that might mean reach up, twist, and you can hold those. So talking about the 6 directions of the spine, there's actually 7, but 6 for this purpose, for spinal movements. So it's twist, twist, side bend, and front and back, so cat and cow. And you might do some of those and play with those for a while, so introduce people to spinal movements. This can be done with anybody in any situation. Spinal movement, twist, side bend, forward and back. That's chair yoga, vinyasa yoga. The thing that's important about the spine is that there's so much information that goes down, up and down from the head, the neck, and down the spine into the body. And we need to do our best to keep this spine safe, mobile, and strong, but also being able to move so that we don't get any stuck areas or fused spine and such. Now, there are reasons why it might be difficult to move your spine in different directions. It could be people in car crashes or different kinds of lives who's been stagnant for too long, or if you were an athlete in your younger years. So it's going to cause differences in body to body. Every time that we're teaching this class, you're checking in and saying, okay, how does this feel? When in doubt, ask that question. Now, how does this feel? And if someone says, well, that feels a little bit off, ask them, okay, we'll try this instead. I love that phrase. Just for today, try this. For example, people oftentimes keep their feet glued together, but you see they need a little stability. So you can say, just for today, take your feet a little wider, about hip distance. And then we're getting into, we can go to hands and knees, cat and cow type stuff, so you can do some spinal movements here. And if we're not used to being on the hands, your wrists can get a little bit sore. That's a good talking point to speak on, especially in the first class, because when people are on their hands or we're in down dog and they get a little sore, it can be frustrating. Like, why does my body feel so broken? And the truth is, it's just you haven't practiced on your hands. You haven't built the muscles to allow that to feel natural and good. So talking about the wrists, how the hands get planted down, placed down, spreading the fingers wide. Maybe it's even stretching out the wrists or giving some options to stretch the wrists throughout the practice. So however you want to do wrist stretches, but teaching people the basics of the hand placement, spine placement, lengthening, meaning lengthening here. So a lot of times you'll see sagging. So how can we speak on lengthening and lifting up through the belly? Yep. And then the basic poses you go through in your very first practice would be downward facing dog, of course, and a sun salutation. That's about all I get through in an hour-long practice. And then if you're doing a series, you can add on from that. You won't have to do the whole introduction spiel again, so you can repeat down dog or the poses you did, the spinal movement, and then add a few poses each practice. So it would be downward facing dog, talking about modifications, variations, holding here, what it means, what it feels like in down dog, maybe making adjustments. And then we walk it forward. Do that ragdoll pose, a forward fold, talk on the benefits of this being an inversion, rolling yourself up. And we start in, talk about mountain pose. So your base poses, mountain pose. Talk about the feet, how we engage the legs, abs in, alignment, pull it in, shoulders down, standing up tall, hands to your heart. And we can reset again. Maybe this is a place where you talk about intention setting. What does that mean? For the longest time, I had no idea what it meant when a teacher would say, now set an intention. I'm new to this. I don't know. What does that mean? So choose a word or a phrase that you can bring in and cultivate in this moment that can help you through your practice, such as strength, or I am beautiful, or I'm going to survive this practice, or I made it, or I am. So it can be an affirmation, a word, or something that helps bring you into this moment and you can take with you now and moving forward. From there, we'll talk on each pose, going through a sun salutation slowly. So you've got mountain pose, talk about it, reach up, forward fold, talk about it, half lift, talk about it. You can even have people hold in these poses while you talk a little longer, talk about it. Walk the feet back to plank pose. Start with the knees, maybe offer that option for knees up. But this one is definitely one you want to check in with beginners. Plank pose is not something that a lot of people are in a lot of times. So this happens. Or this, oh my gosh, my back, oh that's awful. So to talk about that core strength and the full body integration, and you might not want to do a full chaturanga for the first one, so maybe it's to the belly. Cobra pose, talk about that. Alignment, good cues, downward facing dog. Right, so you're going to talk about each pose through the sun salutation and break it down, and then you might try a couple just flowing breath by breath, pose by pose, as you would in a regular vinyasa flow class. If you got a little bit more time, you are welcome to introduce people to a lunge, or maybe it's a warrior pose. But that's about it. After that, we do some sun salutations. You might get a couple poses in there, maybe not. We'll come down. So coming down onto your mat, you still want to introduce people to Shavasana. And what I would do in a beginner class, in the first class, the first lesson, is talk about Shavasana a little bit more than just saying, okay, Shavasana. So what I do, if we're in a circle, is I have one person who is my demo, and I show the whole group, how I press on someone's shoulders or like pull their neck, or how I would do a feel-good sort of assist in Shavasana. I used to do that a lot more, of course right now, currently not, but I want people to know and see in person what I'm doing so that when and if a teacher comes around and makes adjustments, they're not taken by surprise. And so to be prepared for what that is, and also have the option to opt out, knowing that that's fully okay to opt out of adjustments. And then I say, all right, it's time for Shavasana. Close your eyes, lay back. If you would like to be passed on that assist, raise your hand. Otherwise, I will come around and adjust in Shavasana. And I might talk a little bit more about Shavasana, relaxation, lead them into that meditation. Shavasana is a little scary. You're just lying down, you don't know whether or not you can get up. Should you get up? Is class over? Should you leave? Is the teacher gonna lead us back out? My eyes are like plastered open, I'm looking around, I'm sort of fidgety. So talk about all those feelings that come up when you do Shavasana, and tell them it's okay. Make them feel comfortable. Every step of the way, we're making them feel comfortable. Your down dog, sitting for a while, even Shavasana can sometimes be physically uncomfortable, just a little bit, but in time, that's going to grow to ease and comfort as our bodies get stronger and more mobile and flexible. If you teach a weekly ongoing beginner lesson, this would be probably the lesson you want to do. It's very welcoming, different than a gentle yoga class. This one involves a lot more talking on the poses, more introducing and answering questions. Make sure that there is the ability to ask questions. And if it is your only class you're teaching, definitely ask for feedback at the end. That means you might have a form or something that you give out to students. If this is a series, you might want to wait till the end to do that, or you can send it through email. So if you have the ability to collect people's emails and ask them for some feedback from their first yoga class, I highly recommend that. And if you have a handout that you created for your class, double bonus points there. You can easily and simply create a handout or a PDF that you can email for free on canva.com. And I'm actually going to input a tutorial on Canva right here so that you're able to easily make a guide or a handout or something that you can give to your students. It's another learning tool. It makes it a little bit more special than just going to a random class and being in the back and not being seen. So this time, people know that they're being seen, they're being heard, and their questions are being answered, and they feel welcome. All right. Happy yoga teaching, enjoy this, and I hope that this gives you a little bit more confidence, or a lot more confidence, as well as confidence for your potential beginner yoga students.